Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the AOK ZOE A1 handheld. I've heard it called that or AOK ZOE. It seems like this is supposed to be an acronym, although I don't know what it stands for, so however you want to pronounce the name, but I'm going to go with AOK ZOE A1 for this video here. This actually launched after a successful Kickstarter campaign. I recently found out there were some issues with that though. I'm going to talk about that later on in the video, but with the release of the Steam Deck, I feel like that's the most talked about and well-known handheld, with it having decent specs, but the rise of these new more powerful handhelds are splitting the handhelds into more categories. The visual I get here is the Steam Deck is in the middle, and then surrounding it are various other brands that may appeal to consumers for various reasons. You have retro gaming, you have smaller form factor, larger form factor, gamer aesthetics, modding capabilities, controller layout and build quality, software, ease of use, and raw power, just to name some. The Steam Deck to me has the most overall appeal, and I think for good reason, with the price point, build quality, and software leading the way for other companies to take notes from. On the flip side, it also isn't the most powerful, and it has some downsides to its larger size for some people and the lack of ports. There are more things I'll cover here in that regard as the video progresses, as it's hard not to do a comparison within this review. The AOK ZOE A1 here to me leans into the larger form factor and raw power category, which brings us into the specs. This boasts an AMD Ryzen 7 6800U Zen 3 framework CPU with 8 cores, 16 threads, and a 4.7 GHz single core max frequency. The onboard graphics are the AMD Radeon 680M with RDNA 2 framework that has 12 cores at 2200 MHz max frequency. You can get this with 16 or 32 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM that can run at 6400 MHz max frequency. For storage, this has a full slot M.2 ranging from 512 GB models to 2 TB. The display here is an 8-inch IPS screen with a 1920 by 1200 resolution that has 283 pixels per inch and covers 100% of the sRGB color space. The screen has a max brightness of 350 nits with dynamic contrast dimming, and this supports 10-point touch. The battery is 65 watt-hour with a 17,100 milliamp capacity and can run fast charging at 100 watts. For physical dimensions, this is a bigger handheld coming in at 285mm by 125mm by 21mm at the thinnest part. Their website says this weighs about 725 grams, which is 1.6 pounds for the 65 watt-hour version, which is what I have here with 16 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage. I did weigh mine though, and it weighed 758 grams, so it was a little bit off. I do want to note here that I went with the smaller storage because I can upgrade it down the road easily, and for now I can just use a micro SD card for extra storage for games, which is what I've done. Comparing just these specs to the Steam Deck though, the deck features a custom APU built off Zen 2 with 4 cores and 8 threads, which is half of the 6800U on paper. The GPU is also RDNA 2 architecture, but with 8 compute units, not to be confused with cores, while the AOK ZOE has 12 cores. So both of these GPUs here run off the RDNA 2 architecture, and I've read various things saying the compute unit with the Steam Deck is basically a core, and others saying that it's not. For now, let's just say it's a core to simplify this until we actually get to run a couple game tests. The Steam Deck has 16 gigs of LPDDR5 with it running at 5500 MHz compared to the 6400 MHz with the AOK ZOE A1. Power consumption with the deck ranges from 4 to 15 watts, while the A1 ranges from 4 to 28 watts. The higher wattage here does make quite the difference, but keep in mind it will drain your battery quicker. Which, speaking of batteries, the deck has a 40 watt-hour battery, which Steam says is capable of 2 to 8 hours of playtime, while the A1 has a 65 watt-hour battery in the higher end model that I have, and the lower end model has a 48 watt-hour battery. The deck has a 5,313 milliamp battery, while the A1 has a 17,100 milliamp battery, making it a little over 3 times the size. This does mean the A1 is heavier, coming in at the 735.5 grams, while the deck weighs 669 grams. The A1 comes in 2 colors, quantum blue, and lunar white, and it has somewhat of a smooth finish to it, while the Steam Deck just comes in black and it has a more rough matte finish to it. Looking at the physical button and ports on the A1, starting with the front, you have the basic XYBA buttons, 2 thumbsticks, an 8-point D-pad with smooth edges, and the start and back button towards the top. On the bottom right hand side, you have the keyboard button, which will enable a mouse pointer if you long press this button, and the light next to it stays illuminated when you do this. You'll control the mouse pointer with the left thumbstick. Nothing happens if you try to use it with the right, and you can still enable the keyboard to pop up when you press the keyboard button. Under the keyboard button, you have the turbo mode button, which brings up the performance settings that I'll cover in more detail in a little bit. On the bottom corners, you will find the RGB lights, which give a cool accent to the handheld, but are immediately covered up when you grab the device. Under the lights are the speakers, which are decently loud and feel quite comparable to the Steam Decks. You'll most likely use a headset with any handheld more often than not, but these are pretty good speakers considering their size. Let's do a quick sound test in a couple different scenarios, and I'll make sure that I have the volume level labeled on these as well. Moving on to the top of the A1, you'll find the left and right shoulder buttons, the left and right triggers, the power button, volume buttons, power indicator LED light, audio input, USB Type-C 4.0 port for charging or external display, USB-A 3.0 port, and the fan exhaust. On the back, you'll find the fan intake to cool the device and a pretty solid kickstand. This is made out of metal and feels like it will probably hold well, but it's still susceptible to break with a good amount of pressure or a fall off of a desk. On the bottom of the device, you will find another USB Type-C 4.0 port and a micro SD card slot for more storage. Comparing the A1 to the Steam Deck, the controls overall are decent but far from being great. My main issue is the thumbsticks have a very noticeable dead zone. Now the Steam Deck has a dead zone also, but the software allows you to improve this, while the A1 doesn't offer this, so you'll have to rely on in-game settings to adjust this. Now you could replace these thumbsticks on the A1 or the Steam Deck like Linus did on Linus Tech Tips, but considering the price of the A1 here, that seems a bit ridiculous to need to do. For right now, I'm just dealing with it, but I do wish they would improve these. The triggers are okay, but I'll take the deck over the A1. The A1 has a longer register distance, so it feels less responsive. The A1 doesn't have the back pedals like the deck, which for me isn't a big deal as I don't usually use those, but it may be a bummer for some people. The A1 doesn't have touchpads like the deck has, and with the touchpads on the Steam Deck, they actually have haptic feedback, which I really like. It is easier to use if I am going to use the mouse pointer on the screen, so kind of feel like I'm missing out with that one. I like the deck D-pad more than this. The 8 points and how smooth this is just not something that I prefer on the A1. So for me, the deck controls just feel better and more responsive overall than the A1, and the A1 just feels adequate instead of it feeling phenomenal like I would expect for the price tag. And part of that has to do with comfort, with the deck just being more comfortable. It is a slimmer design. The A1 is quite a thick handheld, so I found that with longer play sessions, like it feels better initially just because it fills out my hand, and then over time it's one of those where my hands tend to ache a little bit quicker on the A1 than the deck. Going back to the performance controls, you press the turbo button once and it brings up the menu to change the wattage from 4 to 28 watts. Under that, you can change the GPU frequency from 200 to 2200 megahertz. Note you have to press the Y button to get access to this, and you'll need to do the same for the fan speed control also, which you can change this from 30 to 100%. Under that, you have the vibration controls, which you can change from close, which is no vibration, and then slight to fierce, which is essentially a 1 to 5 scale. The vibration here is decent, but I personally prefer it off, and I just don't want this to drain the battery, and it doesn't feel as good on the A1 as it does on a regular controller. Under that, you can change the resolution, which I really like this feature, and you just scale through the different options that you have and you choose that, and it'll completely change the resolution to that until you change it back. Next to that, you can choose from the 8 RGB light presets, or you can choose from 16 color options if you click the right shoulder button, and then you would click the left shoulder button to go back to the presets. Under that, you have the brightness and volume, which you can scale from 0 to 100% on a slider. The deck has a lot more features here to help with ease of use because it's not running Windows 11, it's running their custom operating system. So with their quick access button, you have 5 tabs. Starting top to bottom, you have notifications, friends, quick settings, performance, and help. Looking at the quick settings and performance only here, in the quick settings you can change the brightness and volume just like the A1, but you can also change the mic volume. You can enable the following on top of this: airplane mode, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, night mode, game rumble, and Steam haptics. The ones that you don't find on the A1 aren't necessarily something that you would miss on the A1 because you actually can access these in Windows 11. You just actually have to go to the settings within that. It just takes some more steps to essentially get this taken care of. Moving on to the performance tab, you have the battery percentage indicator at the top, and under that is my favorite feature, which is the performance overlay level. You can turn it off, or it goes from 1 to 4, which gives a large amount of information at level 4 if you want to see it. For the A1, I run Afterburner to see the performance on screen, or if you just want to track FPS and you're just going to actually play games through Steam, you can use Steam's internal FPS counter, which that will only work with those games that you're playing on Steam. So unfortunately, it's not going to work if you're using any other type of loader, but it is something that's easier to use than trying to download Afterburner if you don't want to mess with that. Now, the downside of larger amounts of performance metrics on either of these devices is that it actually takes up a lot of screen real estate. Now, this is more noticeable on the deck just because it's a slightly smaller screen, but regardless, you're going to notice, hey, this is actually something where I can't really see everything that I need to see within the particular game that I'm playing, which is one of the reasons why I lean more basic here because of that particular issue that I find with it. I do appreciate the fact that it is there though. I like the simplicity that you will find with just pulling up performance metrics on the deck. You can run Afterburners, like I said, on the A1, and that's its own cool feature that it has, because I can run Afterburner or I could run other software if I wanted to not go with Afterburner in order to get performance metrics. So you end up with more options on that side. You just end up having to kind of jump through more hoops in order to get there. Clicking on the Advanced tab, you will open up more options to adjust on the deck. You can change which profile you're using for various settings that are adjusted. Under that, you have per game profiles, which is really cool to have. Below that, you have a frame rate limiter, refresh rate cap, allow tearing, half rate shading, TDP limit, manual GPU clock control, scaling filter, and at the very bottom, you have diagnostic information on storage capacity, time to empty for the battery, and discharging of the battery. The last thing you can change is whether the deck shows the performance overlay when just in Steam. Turning this off will only show the performance overlay when playing games. Shifting over now after covering the specs, what does all this information really mean when it comes to playing games? After using this for 3 months now, I've noticed you have 2 paths to choose from. You can have a higher resolution with the 1920 by 1200 and have very similar FPS to the Steam Deck in most games. There are exceptions to this, of course. Or you can drop the resolution down to the same as the deck at 1280 by 800 and have a solid 60 FPS with most games, depending on the settings, of course. I've personally noticed I tend to lean towards the latter here, especially in AAA titles. The increased resolution for games that aren't as demanding is easier for the hardware to handle, and the step up in visual fidelity is very noticeable in person. It might not translate as well here in the video, but this is where the A1 beats the deck. For me, games like Terraria, Hades, and Dead Cells is more enjoyable on the A1 with the slightly larger screen and full resolution. This just smooths things out in the same way you would notice going from 1080p to 1440p. It reduces the need for anti-aliasing in games as it smooths out the rough edges. That can also translate to emulators with games looking smoother on the A1. I'm not much of an emulator guy personally, but this can handle anything you throw at it in that regard, and having the ability to hook up a keyboard and mouse to help navigate windows here is great when setting up programs like emulators. Now, the increase in resolution for AAA titles isn't worth the trade-off in my opinion, because you're going to take a big hit in the frames department, especially in games like Destiny 2. But before I go further down this rabbit hole with this, that actually shifts me over to one of the biggest draws outside of performance that the A1 offers, which is the ability to play some games that the deck isn't compatible with. Destiny 2 is a great example of this, as the deck won't currently allow you to download the anti-cheat Destiny requires to play. Now, you can stream the game, which I've done in my house with a pretty decent experience, but of course that won't match the performance of playing it native on the A1, which has more to do with the quality of connection you're connected to. But I've noticed even with my gigabyte Wi-Fi in the house, it still can suffer some. Which, quick side note here, the A1 has Wi-Fi 6 over the deck's Wi-Fi 5, and I've been blown away by how fast this thing can download games. It currently crushes any wireless device in my house when it comes to downloads. It's been awesome downloading large games in the same amount of time as my PC, which is hardlined into the router. Now, AAA titles may suffer at the higher resolution, but at the same resolution as the deck, I found the experience to be usually better, or at the very least the same as the deck, but you have a small margin of graphical adjustments you can improve while still maintaining this level of performance where the deck couldn't handle it. Or put another way, the frames per second may stay the same between the A1 and the deck, but the ceiling for the graphical adjustments that you can make goes up on the A1 by anywhere from low to medium margin. So that may be, hey, I'm going from low to medium settings with the game while still maintaining the same level of performance that you would find on the deck. Now, another cool thing outside of playing games the deck doesn't support yet is you can have other game loaders like Epic, GOG, or Rockstar on the A1. Now, you can download these to the deck as well from what I've seen, but it can potentially be a complicated process if you aren't used to modding with that Linux-based system. The downside I've run into sometimes can be the game might not want to display natively on the A1, which is what I've run into with Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm still trying to figure out what's causing it, but the closest I've gotten is the game windowed but stretched to fill the screen. It still runs great, but this isn't ideal. I've used GOG to play my copy of Cyberpunk, and that's actually been a very smooth experience, which has been great. And this also is another thing where I didn't have to buy another copy just for Steam. I already own the game on GOG, that's where I bought it when it came out. If I wanted to play it on the deck and I didn't want to go through the process of trying to figure out how to actually download GOG to that operating system, I would actually have to buy the game again. Now with this, I don't have to do that. I actually get to run the copy that I've already paid for on the A1, as well as the other games that I've bought on GOG over the years. So that's just another bonus that I find with this versus, again, trying to figure out how to download it to the operating system and get into that. That may be something that a lot of people don't want to potentially mess with or try to figure out. Moving on, you can connect this to an external display without the need for a dock like the deck. You just need a Thunderbolt cable and a monitor that can use a USB or Thunderbolt input for connecting devices. The power of the A1 here is more noticeable with an external monitor, as I played Doom Eternal at 1080p with low and medium settings, and the FPS here held in the 50s quite well. I do have the AMD Adrenalin software running resolution scaling to help out here, but I'm very happy with how well this ran. I was expecting more of what I've seen out of the deck when connected to a dock, which is 80p on a bigger screen that looks very pixelated. Less demanding games will perform better here, of course, with Dead Cells running 1080p at 60 FPS with ease. The deck performance is similar there though, but I have found more limitations when it comes to resolution out of the deck. It can run 4K in the OS, but games are usually held to 800p from what I've experienced. The A1 though runs 1080p pretty smooth across the board, depending on the game settings of course, and I would recommend enabling resolution scaling because that does make quite a big difference. Something to keep in mind is if the input will charge the A1 as well as use it as a video input. Mine won't, so I have to either let it run off the battery and be mindful of that, or charge the device at the same time, which means more cables on my desk. With the USB A and C ports, you should be able to run an external GPU with the A1 to give this a big boost with the performance if you wanted to do that. I personally don't actually own one of these, so I can't showcase that, and I don't want to pay hundreds of dollars to actually get one to just showcase that, as it's something I personally wouldn't really use much outside of maybe this one instance, maybe down the road, but it's just something I can't afford right now financially. Now I do like that it has the option to do that here, but I think it's actually going to be a small portion of people that will actually utilize that. Now I won't showcase too many games here with this being played on an external display, but if you do want to see more games and the performance of the A1 when connected to a monitor, let me know in the comment section and I'll actually make sure that I make that video soon. So there are a lot of areas where the A1 is just better than the deck, and I find I prefer the A1 over the deck when gaming most of the time. But for anyone looking to buy this, there are two areas the A1 just can't touch the deck in, and that's price and interface. So the price of the A1 I bought was $1,350. Now the cheapest model is coming in at $1,250 and the highest is a little over $1,600. The Steam Deck has a $399, $529, and $699 model. At the highest price model of the deck, it begs the question, is it worth literally double the price for the A1? I mean, do you get twice the performance with this? Definitely not from what I've experienced, but it does have about a 20 to 30% increase in performance from just what I've experienced without getting into running loads of Cinebench and other tests. It has that increase over the deck. There are a lot of variables that I would need to test and actually see all the outcomes of these things. I just don't have that type of time nor the resources to do that with this. And looking at that, I mean, resolution is going to be one of the major players in terms of testing here because it does have a higher resolution that you can do with this. And that's something that I covered earlier. And kind of to just run through that again, if you're going to play retro games, pixel art based games, basically anything that's less graphically demanding than like AAA titles, you can run it at that 1920 by 1200 resolution at or near 60 FPS with smooth performance. And this is a very noticeable leap visually over the deck. Now for AAA titles, if you're actually going to play in that 1920 by 1200, it's just too demanding. So you're going to need to lower the settings to accommodate that, because again, one of the things that you get out of a higher resolution is it doesn't need the same amount of anti-aliasing that you would need at a lower resolution. So you kind of smooth everything out. So you can drop some of those settings down, But even with that, certain games, if it gets way too busy, then you can actually tank the FPS easily into the 20s. Now, some games just, I don't know what it is with the game, it can maintain a good anywhere from 30 to mid 40s, sometimes go into the 50s at that resolution, while others, they're just more demanding. Maybe it's a newer title, and so with that, you're just gonna struggle at that resolution. At 1280 by 800 though, this can easily maintain 50 to 60 FPS with a little bit more wiggle room to adjust the graphical settings and improve the visuals than you would get out of the deck. Keep in mind the need for higher watts to get this level of performance also, as all of these examples are at the 28 watts. If you start dropping that down, performance is gonna suffer, and that's a trade-off. You're gonna run through the battery much quicker at the 28 watts than if you were to drop it down to like 15 or even way lower than that at 4. If you do plan on adjusting the wattage here, I definitely recommend that you update to the latest AMD drivers. You're gonna need the Adrenalin software, so you're not losing performance on that side. And there's so many different things that you get in that Adrenalin software that help with resolution scaling and things like that, that just squeeze a little bit more juice out of the performance with this device. Which, one of the cool things is it does keep tabs on how long you've played a particular game, and then it gives you an average FPS out of that. Now mine are going to be all over the place because I'm literally changing the resolution and I'm doing all these tests to see what I can get out of this device. But if you're going to leave it set, you can actually see, hey, oh man, I'm averaging 50 something FPS on this particular game. Hey, I'm averaging lower than I want. I'm going to need to adjust the settings with this in order to increase the performance. Again, all the different things that you can adjust in that software, like the resolution scaling, some of the other things are going to help increase that performance also. And from what I've noticed with resolution scaling, it's not something that is very noticeable, which I like. I don't want to know that, hey, this is actually downgrading the resolution in this area, because if you have a game like Doom Eternal, that's a very fast-paced game, and if all you can see is that the software is constantly downgrading that resolution, it's gonna look really bad and you're not gonna want to use it, because now you've sacrificed the visuals so much that any increase in performance isn't going to be worth it to you. So the games I've shown with the performance metrics here are Doom Eternal, Hades, and then Spider-Man. I don't know what happened with the latest Windows update, but it's actually caused issues with these games and they're not performing as well as they should be. I still wanted to showcase the gameplay. I think that's a big downside, is if there are issues with Windows updates, things like this are going to happen. And so I noticed it when I was trying to record The Witcher 3 displaying on an external monitor, and that was taking huge performance hits as well. So I don't currently know what's going on. Again, I'm trying to check and backtrack the Windows update because these issues didn't happen until I updated with Windows 11. And so I still wanted to show the performance here, but it's something that I'm working through currently. Again, my general experience has been there's a 20 to 30% increase, depending on your settings, of course, with the FPS when it comes to most of these games. I'm also noticing though that just with Steam, because of the internals, the way they deal with the software, a lot of games just run really smooth on that. Certain games may struggle a little bit, but I know they're doing patches that are actually focusing on making sure that those games run as smooth as possible with their Steam Deck and with the operating system, where I'm not really seeing that type of support coming from A1 because you're dealing with Windows 11. So yeah, you can deal with Steam, but they're taking care of their stuff, and any updates there may affect performance. These updates to Windows 11 may affect performance. Updating your drivers may affect the performance, and so those can be a headache sometimes, which is kind of what I run into with this, unfortunately. And for me, that's been apparent with Spider-Man. The game started just randomly, almost like freezing. It was like a long stutter, and then it would just push through it. I have no idea what that's about. I didn't have that issue at all until I updated Windows 11. So I wanted to show this to everybody. I wanted to explain what was going on. I definitely think this is a downside with the A1. These issues pop up, and then now you need to figure out how to resolve them. So it's just that trade-off of not going with that Steam-based OS, and you're going to deal with Windows 11, which you would end up dealing potentially with the One X player, if the AO Neo, any of those ones that are going to be Windows based, you may have these problems also. Some last minute things I do want to cover here because I'm sure people will have questions about them. This is a new product with a small portion of the market, so right now there are only a couple of accessories you can get with this. I have an off-brand protective screen on this that I got off of Amazon, and that's tempered glass, but it's the only one I could find, so I didn't find any other options. And then I ordered the official AOK ZOE carrying case, and that cost $40. The Steam Deck, again, considering the price difference here, it came with the case. To me, this should have come with the case because that's just another chunk of change that I've spent on an already very expensive device. So to me, this should have just come with a case. Now, outside of those two things, I haven't found any other accessories that I could actually use with this, right? So there's no protective sleeves or anything like that. Hopefully down the road, because the last thing I want is that this thing's going to get all scratched and messed up. I've not seen anything. And also these things are coming out of China. So most of these things like the carrying case and the protective screen cover, it took 3 to 4 weeks to get to me. The device also took 3 to 4 weeks to get to me. So if you are going to get this, I would order all those things at the same time if you know that you're going to need it. The downside with the case also is the fact that it only houses the A1. You can't actually house the A1 and put the power cable in there with it. It's just going to fit that, which is a bit of a bummer because you're paying this extra cost for it, and then you can't keep everything with it. Bluetooth devices work very well with this. I haven't had any issues with input latency or lag, as well as plugging things into this like a mouse and keyboard. For the Bluetooth, I've used the Xbox One controller as well as the PlayStation 5 controller, and they've all run very well through Steam. I've also used a mouse and keyboard on this, and I've used the mouse with Bluetooth, and I've used the keyboard by just plugging it in, and these things have run very smooth with the device. It just makes certain things that you're needing to potentially type a lot of things out, or you're needing to click on a bunch of things. It just makes that whole process much easier. It's a temporary thing that I do. I don't just sit around and actually just utilize that with the device because it's obviously going to make it super bulky. At that point, you would just use a PC. But in certain instances, it just makes the whole process smooth. You can still game with this though, which is what I've been showing with Halo Infinite here, and there's been zero issues with that as well. I've also streamed to this with the PlayStation 5. That's going to depend on your connection. I found it ran decently smooth, but I would actually run into lag here and there, and it kind of took away from the experience. So it's dependent upon your connection, and even if you have a really good connection, because remember, I have Gigablast internet in my house, and this is running Wi-Fi 6, it still potentially could have some lag with it. But the option is there, and I do like the fact that you could use this if you wanted to. Now, from what I've heard and read, the company that makes this is the same company that makes the One X player. It's the same parent company, so we're finding a lot of the internals with this. I'm seeing that it's going to be in the new One X player too. I've also heard some stories about when people actually bought this and they were doing it with the Kickstarter, there were some issues around that where they were actually sending devices to people that bought on Amazon ahead of the people that they should have sent it to that actually bought this with the Kickstarter program. And so that's not a good business practice. That makes me a little bit nervous on this. Now, I'm gonna try to find links so that I can put it in the description so you guys can watch some of this stuff yourself. So with that being said, I found out about all this stuff post. It's not a big company, so some of this stuff just kind of gets buried, I think. And you have larger players. You do have the Steam Deck. You have the One X player. There's a bunch of other companies with different names that I always have a hard time pronouncing. But this is just a small portion of the market. And if you're trying to make a good impression, doing things like that isn't going to get you there. To wrap everything up, it's going to come down to what you're looking for and what your budget is when it comes to a handheld. If you want top performance and are willing to pay the premium for it, then the AOK ZOE A1 offers that. If you still want solid performance and a cheaper price point with a very easy to use interface, then the Deck is the way to go. I personally think the price point here makes this more of a niche product. I can already tell I'm going to get a ton of comments about how overpriced this is, and the Steam Deck is the way to go. I'll also have a small portion of comments that like this product or have something negative to say about the Steam Deck. Ultimately, it's your money and what you do with it is your business. I think this product is a great addition to the handheld lineup, and more competition in the market means more innovation. I think the price point of this should be closer to what the Kickstarter price was, which is a couple $100 cheaper than the current price. My model would have cost about $1,049, which seems more reasonable. The base model was $949 for the 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. Hopefully we see these prices come down in the future, but as more products launch and the market becomes more competitive, I feel like price is going to be a large determining factor as to whether a product can succeed long term. The higher price point of these gets you into a really good gaming laptop territory with an RTX 3060 or 3070 GPU that might not be as portable as a handheld, but the raw power that could deliver would easily beat the A1. Looking further into 2023, the handheld market is only going to get more competitive with the One X Player 2 launching soon, which I'll be reviewing that, and the AO Neo 2 and then AO Neo Geek launching right now. There are a lot of handhelds to get excited about. Well, that's going to be it for this one. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and if you have any questions about this, I'll answer that for you there. I'll have a link for this in the description if you want to pick it up, as well as the screen protector and then the carrying case. I'll also make sure that the links for these other videos where they're talking about some of the issues that the company had in terms of getting these out to the Kickstarter supporters if you want more information on that. As always, thanks so much for watching. If you like the video, hit the like button for me as it helps support the channel. If you want to continue to follow along with all my content, hit the subscribe button for me, and I'll see you in the next video.